Hey guys, welcome back to another lecture. This one is going to be a special reading of a PDF that I just completed that I'm quite proud of and very happy to share. First, let me thank Atav, Barbara, Marty, Avinov, and Taylor, my biggest supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar. Thank you very much. Your generosity is appreciated. Now, the document that I want to read here is a PDF that I just published on my website, wolfpox.com. You can go get a free copy right now if you want to. I suggest you do so you own your own copy and you can have it on whatever device you want. It's called Jesuit Invention of the Protocols of Zion, a Hypothesis. Let me first read the disclaimer. I do not claim to be an expert on anything. As a lay researcher and Bible-believing Christian, I offer this hypothesis as a challenge to the biggest conspiracy theory against Jews that exists today. Namely, I hypothesize that the protocols of the meetings of the learned elders of Zion, hereafter called the Protocols, was created by the Jesuits as a means to deflect suspicion from their own conspiracy against Europe and North America from the late 1700s to our current day. It is a hypothesis only and could be wrong. An archived digital version of the protocols can be found here, and I provide a link there. You can click on that and download it, your own copy of the protocols. I suggest you get a copy. First, why Jesuits? Why Jews? Before speaking about the protocols themselves, let me draw your attention to the remarkable circumstances surrounding the Jesuit order in both the late 1700s and the late 1800s. This will inform the whole question of the protocols. By the 1740s, the Jesuits were wealthy, internationally famous, and acting as if they were beyond the control of colonial powers such as France and Spain. The Jesuits operated their own slave colonies in South America and elsewhere, tricking natives into donating their land under the delusion that the Jesuits were establishing modest religious communes for their benefit. Disguising their activities, they exported untold wealth back to their trading posts in France. They paid no taxes to the monarchs who protected their trade routes and presided over their lands, exploiting the poorest and most ignorant people of the world, while also taking advantage of the tolerant ruling powers of Europe. They were warned to obey the monarchs and relinquish their claims of being above the law. But with typical arrogance, their Jesuit general, the head of their order, a military commander, stated that they should be allowed to operate freely wherever they existed or not allowed to exist at all. This was a poor choice of words, and the kings responded accordingly. France and Spain both banished the Jesuits from their territories, and just like that, the wealthy holdings of the Jesuits were confiscated and given to other Catholic orders who were more respectful of worldly authority. The Jesuits would not take this lightly. But the European nobility knew all about the Jesuits' greed and false holiness, and were tired of their insolence by the 1760s. The Pope himself succumbed to international pressure in 1773 by abolishing the very office of the Jesuit order worldwide with a promise that they would never return. But it was during their supposed absence that they were the most active. 3 years after their order's abolishment, a Jesuit named Adam Weishaupt established the Illuminati in Bavaria. This would be the main proxy organization through which they enacted revenge on the French nobles, creating the so-called Jacobins to murder and destroy as many as they could get their hands on. The French Revolution was soon to follow. After this came the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, further terrorizing Christian monarchs and Vatican alike. The Pope had betrayed the Jesuits, and the Jesuits wanted to humble the papacy in return. Their plan worked, and the Jesuits were restored in 1814. just over 40 years later. Napoleon was nothing but a puppet of the Jesuits, incapable and stupid without the vast intelligence network provided by them. It was around this time that a French Jesuit priest named Abbé Baruel published a scandalous conspiracy theory detailing how the murderous and mysterious sect called Jacobins had been created by the Freemasons and Illuminati behind the scenes. Called Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism, it is available for download here. Ultimately, the blame was placed on the Illuminati, which Baruel never acknowledged was governed by the Jesuits. Officially, Adam Weishaupt was opposed to the Jesuits, as were Freemasons. Then, a few decades later, Baruel produced the Simonini letter, which went even further and blamed everything on an even greater and more secretive Jewish conspiracy. And this is how the notion of a secret Jewish world conspiracy originated and became mingled with the idea of Freemasons, Illuminati, and Zionism. A very similar situation arose 100 years later in the 1800s. The Jesuits had been restored for decades, but they were once again caught in their trickery, sabotage, conspiracies, and deception, and faced the possibility of abolishment again. They were exiled from certain countries and exposed as manipulators of the public. They used the same tactics in response: a bloody terror campaign against Christian nobles, blamed on Masons and Jews, with a substantiating document, the Protocols, at the center of the confusion. Only this time they did not take credit for writing the document themselves, but released it through their own channels as a secret discovery. Jesuit deflection. Both Baruel's memoirs and the later Protocols have striking similarities. They both sought to create paranoia within European Christian nobility, calling for them to unite against the unseen conspiracy threatening to destroy their prosperous and seemingly untouchable kingdoms. In the case of Baruel's memoirs, this message was direct, but in the case of the Protocols, it was done using reverse psychology, as the elders of Zion brag about being unstoppable unless Protestants and Catholics put aside their differences and form an alliance. The message was the same. By today's standards, this might be considered sloppy propaganda, and even in the 1920s, it was not believed by most people who heard about it. Nevertheless, it is clear why the Jesuits wrote it: to popularize the idea of a common enemy that threatened all of Christianity. In both cases, they used their own abolished Jesuit agents to foment the revolutions that would legitimize their warnings. Anglican, Lutheran, and Russian Orthodox churches had no love for the Vatican. They hated the constant meddling of the Jesuits in their affairs. The German Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, created a campaign called Kulturkampf, Struggle for Civilization, to systematically expose the Jesuits across Europe. In 1872, he banished them from Germany altogether. Shortly afterward, the Protocols were created, and suddenly the Zionist conspiracy seemed to explode again, only this time in a more cartoonishly overt fashion that betrayed the whole idea of a secret agenda. The result was Marxism, the bloody Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, and the spreading of liberal socialist agitation across Europe, with prominent quote-unquote Jewish leaders drawing negative attention in almost every nation. The Zionist Congress, which I doubt even happened, conveniently called for Jews everywhere to suddenly become visible, loud, and obnoxious to European monarchs, while at the same time the protocols called for the discretion and subtlety in arranging events through Freemasons. It is therefore silly to even humor the idea that what happened was a Zionist plan, much less an ancient mystical conspiracy passed down by geniuses for generations. The truth is, Jews were gaining acceptance and coexisting with Christians everywhere before the Jesuits were banished. There was no Jewish conspiracy, only a steady desire to be free from discrimination. Catholic countries, such as Poland, randomly abused Jews in order to keep the old animosities burning. They needed Jews to remain an angry underclass precisely so that they could be exploited as a revolutionary force when the timing was right. The Lutheran Otto von Bismarck was cooperating with so-called Jewish socialists and finding useful compromises, so that Germany was one of the most progressive and prosperous nations in Europe. Thus, the Jesuits were in the unfortunate position of needing to draw immediate attention to obvious Jewish meddling, while still maintaining the pretense that it was not meant to be noticed. The Zionist conspiracy theory has suffered from this humorous paradox ever since. It is supposed to be seen as the most forbidden, controversial, hidden plot ever to exist, orchestrated by masters of hiding the truth, while constantly being advertised by the same controlled truth movement who never acknowledged the role of the Jesuits or the Catholic Church, despite them being an actual military order with a long history of very real sabotage, murder, war, and conspiracy. My hypothesis is that, like the mysterious onslaught of the Jacobins before the French Revolution, the release of the protocols and subsequent campaign of Jewish disruption was staged by Jesuits, using actors and proxy groups who hoped to exploit the real suffering of actual Jews. This document will brainstorm how this was possible. Bias against Jews. Jews had integrated into Europe to the extent that they could, but they were treated with contempt and suspicion by many, especially within the Catholic Church and its derivatives. It is well known that usury was declared a mortal sin by the Catholic Church, and that because Jews were not Christians, but had special Old Testament permissions, they were allowed to be an exception to this rule. Rather than being honest and charging usury themselves, royal families kept court Jews in their company for this purpose, giving them the job of exchanging currencies, making profitable deals, and doing the ugly business they didn't want to be associated with. Funding mercenaries and financing operations became a normal part of these court Jews' existence. Think of it as a moral laundering operation. Jews were willing to deal with foreigners, use family connections, and take advantage of those in need for corporate gain, while the Christian royals found this repulsive. It was hypocritical, of course, since they did not praise Jews as useful allies or approve of their strategies, but still condemned them as greedy, evil, cunning, and ruthless while using them. The Christian ruling families wanted the wealth, but not the guilt. Thus, Jews were trained by circumstance to play out the very stereotype they would be demonized for. Hatred and distrust of Jews over the centuries ensured that any partnership with their leaders was highly delicate and circumstantial, not deeply inbred as the conspiracy theory suggests. The Roman Catholic Church was a bitter opponent of anyone who defied their conquests and forced conversions, which is why they slaughtered Jews in the French/German region in 1096 AD. They were expelled from England and France in 1290 and 1394, respectively. Jews were blamed for causing the Black Death plague and other misfortunes. The reformer Martin Luther wrote a booklet called The Jews and Their Lies in 1543, after he failed to win them over to Christianity with his purified version of church doctrine. They were segregated, persecuted, and forbidden from the official levers of power. Many were thrown in jail or punished on flimsy accusations, and their property was often confiscated. This does not stop believers in the Zionist conspiracy theory from imagining that a vast and robust partnership was fostered at the highest level between Jews and Catholics, and later Protestants and atheists. The obvious contradictions and implausibility only serves to make the treachery more salivating to them because they are capable of noticing. They fall into a dazzled spell connecting Templars, Jerusalem, and Eastern mysticism without stopping to think seriously about the basic reality on the ground, where Jews were often divided, unorganized, migrating, struggling, and uninterested in returning to Jerusalem or building a new temple. Crypto-Jews and secret bloodlines becomes their only answer, along with ancient warnings in the scriptures that they choose to interpret as applicable to all future generations of Jews. The Jesuits capitalized on all of this, hoping they could rewrite history to seem as if Jews were the dominant force of the world, not the satanic Roman Empire of blasphemy. Jesuit desperation. In reality, the Jesuits were far more dangerous than any Zionist league could have hoped to become. They were an actual military order, with trained spies and a chain of command. We know their origin, their motives, and their trajectory. They devised long-term, coordinated, secret plans to reclaim power in every nation where they had been thwarted. Ever since the Protestant Reformation damaged the papal stranglehold on Europe, they had used their Inquisition, their slanders, their intrigues, and assassinations to destroy Protestant nations and terrify them into submission. This only hardened the Protestants against Rome, however. It was open warfare in many cases, and the Catholics were clearly the bitter villains hoping to reclaim despotic authority. In Britain, the Jesuits even attempted to blow up the British Parliament in 1605 with hundreds of barrels of gunpowder, aimed at killing everyone inside, in what became known as the Gunpowder Plot. They were thwarted and exposed. Yet it was precisely because the Jesuits were a global spy network with advanced knowledge in almost every field that they were also respected as private tutors of nobility, university creators, scientists, and writers. They were masterminds, and nobles hoped to use them for their own benefit while holding back their subversive plots. They thrived as the ultimate intelligence force since their inception, feared by monarchs who knew their workings. So while Jewish families may have had ambitions through their private banks and trade operations, they were not a tightly organized conspiracy, nor willing to outrage the world with such daring schemes. Jews had a horrific history of being abused, but were becoming more accepted, less punished, and had little reason to arrange bloody revolutions that could easily backfire at the time of their greatest tolerance. Time was on their side. The Jesuits, on the other hand, were running out of time quickly and stood to lose the world. So, in their hate and cleverness, they projected everything onto Jews in their fictions and committed atrocities in their name. Evidence within the protocols. The main defense of the protocols is that they match reality, regardless of how many logical problems there are with the basic premise of the supposed Zionist meeting, or the nature of the document itself. This is very telling because it proves a willingness to believe based on appearances and emotional reactions rather than critical thought and reconstructive logic. Ironically, the protocols themselves warn about how the masses believe things based on appearance, which is a principle the Jesuits know well. What is missing is a plausible alternative explanation, which is what I have provided. No serious person can look at the protocols and accept that the elders of Zion, if they were real, would say such strange things in their own secret meetings about how they control this or that aspect of society, reminding each other. Their methods of control would have to be their daily concerns if this document were true. The way it's written, it's as if they are constantly in danger of forgetting what they do for a living. Anyone who controls his own household, much less an entire empire of cleverly controlled lies, is fully immersed in managing it. They would have no need for a boring repetition of the basic routines they take part in constantly. Nor can anyone explain why the document would be written the way it is by the elders. It purports to be an exact transcript of an endlessly long speech given by one person, rather than the main points of thought from various participants, which is what minutes are supposed to be. But if we imagine that this speech was the final summary of everything agreed upon in a much longer meeting, then it is even more silly to see so much bluster about the nature of the goyim and the basic concepts regurgitated. And for what purpose was this document needed to begin with? Do they need copies for their collection at home? Is every rabbi on the planet supposed to receive their own private copy? Why would the elders not disseminate their ideas using their synagogues, via word of mouth, private letters, or informants? If this habit of creating transcripts has been going on for centuries, we should expect to find thousands of copies of various meetings of the elders of Zion eventually in archives. Are they usually destroyed after a time? Why has only one ever surfaced? In short, the protocols do not read anything like a real discussion between actual elders of Zion. Instead, it reads exactly as I have proposed, a clumsy projection of the Jesuits' plans onto an unrealistic gathering of Jews with unrealistic dialogue, meant to alarm and unify the Christian nobility of Europe, while simultaneously instructing their own future proxies about the general steps they will be required to take in order to fulfill these man-made prophecies of doom, if the nobles reject the call to unite. Examples of suspicious passages. Look at this passage taken from Protocol number 5 and tell me that this was written by a real Jew for other real Jews to understand, and I will laugh at you. Moreover, the art of deflecting masses and individuals by means of cleverly manipulated theory and verbiage, by regulations of life in common, and all sorts of other quirks, in all which the goyim understand nothing, belong likewise to the specialists of our administrative brain, reared on analysis, observation, on delicacies of fine calculation. In this species of skill we have no rivals. any more than we have either in the drawing up of plans, of political actions, and solidarity. In this respect, the Jesuits alone might have compared with us, but we have contrived to discredit them in the eyes of the unthinking mob as an overt organization, while we ourselves all the while have kept our secret organization in the shade. However, it is probably all the same to the world who is its sovereign lord, whether the head of Catholicism or our despot of the blood of Zion. But to us, the chosen people, it is very far from being a matter of indifference. If this was not farcical enough, let us continue to the next paragraph, where the author dumbs down the conclusion for the reader even more forcibly. For a time, perhaps, we might be successfully dealt with by a coalition of the goyim of all the world. But from this danger we are secured by the discord existing among them, whose roots are so deeply seated that they can never now be plucked up. We have set one against another, the personal and national reckonings of the goyim, religious and race hatreds, which we have fostered into a huge growth in the course of the past 20 centuries. This is the reason why there is not one state which would anywhere receive support if it were to raise its arm, for every one of them must bear in mind that any agreement against us would be unprofitable to itself. We are too strong. There is no evading our power. The nations cannot come to an even inconsiderable private agreement without our secretly having a hand in it. And here we have the crux of the protocols. The idea that the Protestant Reformation and all other divisions of religion have been a Jewish conspiracy to divide and conquer, and that the only way to oppose it is through ecumenism, or religious unification under the papacy. The false choice between Jewish/Masonic overlords who hate Christianity, or a partnership with the Vatican to eradicate their influence, is the goal of the book. As you can clearly see, the Jesuits make sure to position themselves as the only possible saviors, since, quote, in this respect the Jesuits alone might have compared with us, end quote, meaning in the respect of being, quote, reared on analysis, observation, and delicacies of fine calculation, in the drawing up of plans of political actions and solidarity, end quote. And here in protocol number 17, we have another similar threat. We have long past taken care to discredit the priesthood of the goyim, and thereby to ruin their mission on earth, which in these days might still be a great hindrance to us. Day by day, its influence on the peoples of the world is falling lower. Freedom of conscience has been declared everywhere, so that now only years divide us from the moment of the complete wrecking of that Christian religion. Freedom of conscience was a concept introduced and condemned by Pope Pius IX in the year 1864 in his Syllabus of Errors decree. For this reason, it would never be used by Jews, especially among themselves in secret meetings. It would, however, be at the forefront of a Jesuit's mind as he plotted how to manipulate an increasingly secular society falling into the hands of their Illuminati proxy groups. The Syllabus of Errors was part of an operation known as quanta cura, an attempt to position the papacy as the savior of Europe and the world in the face of growing schism, atheism, and confusion. The Jesuits felt the need to advertise this operation's potential benefits. Notice how freedom of conscience, promoted by the elders, is contrasted against the credibility of the priesthood, i.e., Jesuits, which is again advertised as a possible quote-unquote great hindrance to the Zionist conspiracy. Soon after, we read this: "The King of the Jews will be the real Pope of the universe, the patriarch of an international church. But in the meantime, while we are re-educating youth in new traditional religions, and afterwards in ours, we shall not overtly lay a finger on existing churches, but we shall fight against them by criticism calculated to produce schism." This is one of the threats of the protocols. The King of the Jews, obviously meant to be taken as the Antichrist by the reader. Yes, the protocols outline at some length the nature of this King of the Jews and how he must behave, how he must be surrounded by what appears to be curious onlookers, and how he will be the opposite of the vain goyim rulers who enjoy being flattered, but are always guarding themselves in fear. What is the purpose of this description of their supposed Messiah, since it has not come to pass yet? Evidently, the protocols are a program meant for an indefinite future process. As they often say, they are only a few years. There are only a few years until the Christian church will dissolve. But yet, the fulfillment of its promises haven't happened. The lie of the protocols must be dragged out for as long as the Jesuits can make use of it. Which obviously took on a new life since the establishment of the nation of Israel. Building up the narrative and outward appearance of a Zionist conspiracy is of critical importance to the Jesuits, while the real goal is always the same: to divide and destroy all Protestants or opponents of Rome. There are dozens more passages we could analyze in deducing the origin of the protocols, but let this much suffice. And we're going to end this episode here. We're going to continue in the next part. There's plenty more to go. This is only about halfway. We're going to get into the inspiration behind the Protocols of Zion and so much more. So if you're enjoying this, share it, like it. And if you want to get to the really good stuff, keep tuning in, because we're going to get to the next part of this amazing analysis of the Protocols of Zion and the role of Jesuits in the conspiracy.